All across the country, Asian Americans are being targeted in record numbers. Predictably, every mainstream corporation or institution, including Dartmouth, took a supposed stand against this anti-Asian crime. President Hanlon proclaimed that Dartmouth was deeply saddened and that the violence against Asian Americans was wholly inconsistent with the premium that Dartmouth places on diversity in the community. And that's really unfortunate, because historically, a lot of Asians don't agree. As Asian American issues enter the national discourse, we wanted to take a look at Dartmouth and the issues Asian Americans have faced in this community in Hanover, New Hampshire. While the national conversation is important, we think it's also important to examine flaws in our own community.
There are numerous instances we could talk about. There was the time where former President Kim was harassed online with slurs, or the instance of an Asian professor being denied tenure for dubious reasons that some fellow faculty members thought racist. But let's focus, for now, on the most immediate cases.
And perhaps the most recent potential case of anti-Asian discrimination happened last year with the Dartmouth swim and dive team. Undergoing severe budget cuts due to the recession caused by COVID-19, Dartmouth made the unfortunate decision to cut a few sports teams, among them Dartmouth swim and dive. What does this have to do with anti-Asian sentiment? Well, the swim team pursued every potential avenue to be reinstated. They talked to administrators, created a change.org petition, and gathered as much public and trustee support as possible. None of those things had any impact until finally, one of them noticed a small inconsistency in the data.
We found out that in the elimination of these 5 teams, almost 50% of the Asian student athletes were eliminated as well. And we're like, that can't just be a number that happens to be the way it is if they conducted a full investigation. So it made us feel like they knew what they were doing because they claimed to know what they were doing. And that result turned out to be almost half of Asian American student athletes.
Months and months of activism to no avail, but then immediately after going under the threat of subpoena and forced to show their data and confronted with accusations of anti-Asian discrimination, the administration just gave up. Of course, nobody knows what really happened behind closed doors. Maggie, the Dartmouth swim and dive captain, herself isn't sure about what she believes about the administration's decision.
Yeah, and even if it wasn't their intention, it still happened. Like it still was the fact. So we really wanted them to take responsibility for that, and they wouldn't.
Perhaps we should give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, it could just be an outlier. But unfortunately, this is far from the only negative administrative decision involving the Asian American community. In the fall of 2018, multiple Asian American students went to their common rooms or dormitories to find hate speech written on their doors and walls. Slurs that I can't repeat here because they're so vehement circulated campus buildings and were followed months later by racist emails sent to many different races from a hacked student's account to professors and students alike in 2019. Anti-Asian sentiment comes from somewhere, and the college should have taken swift and decisive action against the culprit. Unfortunately, even though they were identified, Asian students were given no notice about what happened to the culprit, and our sources from the student government have told us that they face no real repercussions at all. Over the last year, the administration and SNS have had the wherewithal and will to persecute students for relatively harmless activities, like meeting their friends indoors and kicking them off for violating the college's COVID policy. Dean Lively said that students would, quote, disappear if they got caught. But in response to actual racism, violent rhetoric directed at a racial minority group, nothing seems to have occurred. No workshops, no communication with the harmed after initial questioning, no accountability at all. Even if the administration wasn't going to take action themselves, they sat on information about a community member who very clearly antagonized a racial minority. The very least they could have done is communicate with the people targeted, but they didn't even do that. Sure, Dartmouth has its various organizations that make Asian students feel welcome. Dow, 4A, the ASCOL department. But on an institutional level, the Dartmouth administration has often failed to address the needs of the Asian community. President Hanlon's statement says, we will continue to utilize the power of education to help illuminate and eradicate the ills of society and to achieve a world characterized by respect, equality, and justice for all. And finally, after Asian activists advocated for years, an Asian American Studies department was finally created with a minor forthcoming. So things are looking up. If only that empathy was present and consistent when the community needed it most.